Hello, my name is Rob, and today I will talk about how natural disasters can add to the cost of housing in Canada. And I have a news article and I'm just pulling up the news article. From the Narwhal, Canadians were promised a national flood insurance program 6 years ago. Will Carney actually deliver? And this is in the Narwhal newspaper. And this is by Shannon Waddles on August 19th, 2025. And this article talks about the need for an insurance program dealing with flooding and the impacts of flooding on housing prices. The article says frequent flooding means more insurance claims and will drive up insurance premiums. And the article says that since 2013, flooding has resulted in $850 million in insured losses each year. And 10% of Canadian households face a high risk of flooding, and they can't get flood insurance to protect their homes and belonging, and this is according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada. This is a huge issue because if people lose their homes as a result of flooding, they also lose out on a lot of the money that they have for essentials. People can go bankrupt as a result of losing their homes. And they won't be able to afford groceries, and the government will be forced to step in to support individuals that can't have whose homes have been destroyed as a result of flooding. Insurance companies are stopping coverage to high-risk areas. This is what the article is saying. And the governments all have to fill gaps with disaster assistance, which supports rebuilding efforts in Canadian communities hit by disasters. But there comes a point when people shouldn't rebuild in an area that is known to have a disaster. This article does talk about how the disaster relief incentivizes building in high-risk areas that are prone to flooding or forest fires. This article focuses on flooding. There was Ryan Ness, a director of adaptation with Canadian Climate Institute. The article said, he said in an interview that disaster relief also doesn't incentivize communities or individuals to reduce their risk. And there was a quote, "There's just an assumption that you'll be covered if something goes wrong, and you don't have to take any action to reduce the likelihood that you'll be flooded and experience a lot of damage." And Ness also said, a well-designed program would incentivize both homeowners and communities to take steps to lower the risk of future floods. This is interesting. The British Columbia minister said that she hadn't heard much from Ottawa about progress on the program this year. Kelly Green, the Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Resilience of BC, said that she hadn't heard much from Ottawa on the issue since being appointed to a post in November 2024. It is now August, so December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. That's 9 months. Not hearing anything. And the article said that this was promised in 2019. So there's been 6 years and there's not that much to show for an insurance program. I know that there was flooding in Texas this summer in July, and people lost their homes and lives. There's been several natural disasters in Canada, including in Kingston, Newfoundland, and British Columbia. I think they referenced some of the disasters that have happened. Let's see. There was a Toronto flood a year or two ago, and atmospheric rivers. There's also been derechos that cause flooding in Peterborough, Ontario, which I experienced. A lot of power. There was a lot of power outages. That one didn't involve flooding, and actually, I think there was some flooding. I'm not sure. And yeah, I think that was. Yeah, so those were some of the natural disasters that were referenced. And then let's see. I have to find who was Stewart. Stewart is from the Insurance Bureau of Canada Vice President, and who's been advocating for the federal government to on national insurance. And then the article has a quote: if provincial governments are going to increase the overall liability by adding housing and flooding plans, for example, they need to take ownership of subsidizing the insurance for those properties. And this comes at a time when governments and like the Ontario government is weakening environmental protection. I would say likely across Canada, though, decreasing environmental protection and increasingly building on wetlands. And then there's another highlight. Canada's housing crisis does have the potential to exacerbate the risk of disasters from floods to fires. There was a February 2025 report, which I'll link to, which I'll show, from the Canadian Climate Institute, which concluded unless precautions are taken to keep new homes from being built in high-risk zones, more than 540,000 homes could be built in flood-prone areas by 2030. And that's $2 billion in extra damages every year. And then if precautions are taken, it could go to $340 million per year. And then there's another highlight. One way to deter development in high-risk areas would be to make those homes ineligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. And then insurance alone is not the answer. So that's the article in the Narwhal. I think it's important to read and think about all the damages that could be avoided as a result of not building on floodplains or high-risk fire areas. We know what happens when we build on high-risk areas. People lose their lives, people lose their homes, and there's a lot of money that ends up being spent on disaster relief. That if the disaster was prevented, it could be spent somewhere else, and people would not lose their lives. They would not lose the homes, and the society would be better off. So that brings us to the next item. This is the report Close to Home. I won't look at the entire report, but it's from the Canadian Climate Institute, and it's How to Build More Housing in a Changing Climate, February 2025. This is the report referenced in the article. Made a couple of highlights. Hundreds of thousands of new homes could be built in areas that are highly exposed to climate-related hazards, particularly floods and wildfires. They have conclusions. Without changes in policy, Canada could build more than 150 1,000 homes in areas of very high flood hazards and over 220,000 homes in municipalities exposed to high wildfire hazards by 2030. And 2030 is only 5 years away. And then they give the $340 million versus $2 billion. And then wildfires could add $100 billion in addition to that. Combined damages could be $3 billion a year. And then it mentions increasing insurance premiums and tax-funded disaster recovery efforts. And then in most provinces, gaps in land use policies allow for housing to be built in high hazard flood and wildfire zones. And those wildly different standards for flood land use planning. There's 1 in 20 year flood regulations versus 1 in 100 in some provinces. So the provinces need to standardize the protection so that it meets at least 1 in 100, because 1 in 20 is not enough. There was a graphic I hope to show about that. Maybe I can... I can look up 1 in 100, see where that graphic is. And then it says 1 in 100 year flood is referring to there being a 1% chance of a flood occurring in any given year. And then a 1 in 20 year flood is a 5% chance. And climate change is increasing the likelihood of there being a 1 in 100 year flood. Oh, here it is. Okay. So, a 1 in 20 year flood, the average losses per house could be 16,000. A 1 in 100 year flood line, it could be 1,100. And a 1 in 1,000 year flood line, the average loss could be 200 annually. That's with flooding. And this report also talks about fires as well. And where was I? I was reading the conclusions. So I was talking so some provinces have 1 in 20, some provinces have 1 in 100. And apparently Ontario and Saskatchewan have stronger land use policies compared to other provinces, but legislative changes in Ontario are may be threatening some of the advantage that Ontario has in terms of land use. And we shouldn't be building on floodplains anyways, or paving over wetlands regardless, because that increases the flood potential. And then most of the homes are concentrated. A small number of homes are concentrated in the highest risk zones, are responsible for the majority of potential future losses. And it says redirecting just 3% of the homes targeted for construction by 2030, about 150,000 units away from high flood hazard areas and toward safer ground, could reduce Canada's flood risk to new housing by nearly 80%. Just 3% of homes will make an 80% difference. And then it says federal and provincial programs that aim to increase housing supply often overlook climate-related hazards and causing development in risky areas. Disaster assistance programs further contribute to the problem by creating a more hazard and allowing homeowners to rely on post-disaster recovery rather than proactive risk avoidance. And then there's like outdated maps. And then there's some recommendations. The federal government should expand its screening measures for housing programs so that they support housing in low hazard areas. And then they should have interim hazard screening maps and fund project-specific analysis to ensure development occurs in safer locations. And then I like this. The most affordable home is the one you don't have to keep rebuilding. And then it says location matters. Building new homes in location vulnerable to worsening climate impacts will undermine affordability by placing new homes in harm's way. And some of this is repeated. 60% of Canadian communities are at least partially situated in wildland urban interface where wildfires can readily spread into residential areas. This summer, there's a lot of communities that are experiencing forest fires. And then between 1985 and 2015, the total urban area at high risk of flooding increased by 300 square kilometers, which is half the size of Toronto. And then 110 square kilometers were at very high risk. And then between 2010 and 2015, urban settlements in high and very high flood risk areas expanded by 63 square kilometers across the country, an area more than half the size of Vancouver. And that's just 5 years. And then there was some graphs showing the different provinces. Quebec, it looks like Quebec is very high hazard in comparison to the others. I haven't done statistics on these graphs, but yeah. And I don't think I highlighted anything else. I'm just going to see if I highlighted anything else. So So I'll see if there's any other articles that I looked at. Oh, those this Canadians need flood protection by the Insurance Bureau of Canada. They have a website, and I'm just going to go to the video. So, in conclusion, it is important to not build in hazardous areas, and there is evidence that housing cost will increase as a result of building in high risk areas, from insurance, disaster relief, and rebuilding the home has its own cost associated with it. It takes away resources that could be used to build additional housing. And I think that this should be prioritized. We need people also should have access to insurance so that they don't lose all their life's savings. But they should also be discouraged from living in high-risk areas, especially new buildings. But people that are already living in high-risk areas, they should have insurance, access to insurance, and making reforms to protect the natural spaces and not building in hazardous areas will save lives and reduce cost to the government and save everyone some monetary value. As well, we should protect the natural environment for the sake of protecting the natural environment. But the natural environment does have there is services attached to the that are all provided by the natural environment. That if we destroy the natural environment, it will add additional infrastructural cost. That could be a separate video. I hope that you have a good rest of your day, and I will be back with a different video.